your sector that has meant that you haven't fallen into the trap, that you haven't followed that route?
I think it's more that we see the value in apprenticeship and graduates, and therefore we would never look to substitute one with the other. Absolutely, we're utilising the levy to upskill our existing workforce, but as well as new entrants in, because we see that with a positive correlation with the skill shortage. Absolutely. You know, Network Rail has an ageing workforce, and therefore apprenticeships and graduates help balance that out in readiness for the future.
I think one of the challenges at the apprenticeship scheme is it's never been clear whether it's for bringing young people into employment or upskilling and reskilling existing employees, nor is it clear what the balance is going to be. So, I mean, as a result, you get a free-for-all, and sometimes you get like one and sometimes the other.
But I actually think that's a positive thing, that it's inclusive to everybody. I think that, you know, we have our new entrants for, you know, typically school leaders. However, we have a workforce that perhaps didn't have the opportunity when they left school, that do want to develop, and therefore we're now enabling them to do that with the support of the company.
Sonia, have you said everything you wanted to say, or did I confuse you by saying that I was introduced?
No, that was fine.
That's fine.
Yes.
And Oliver, will you keep me posted with questions coming in from does anybody in the room have a question for Sonia or me or Alison or any thoughts on the issue of public sector apprenticeships? If not,
we have a hand up actually on the call from Michelle Wyat. If you'd like to unmute Michelle and
Hi, I'm Michelle Way. I work for NHS Employers. I'm part of the NHS Confederation. We work quite closely with Jane Hadfield from NHS England. So if there are any questions I can answer on behalf of Jane while she's not here, I will try for the NHS public sector apprenticeships.
Thank you, Michelle. That's very helpful. Meanwhile, we will continue to put Sonia on the spot. I mean, we hear an awful lot about flexibility issues. Something that affects you or concern. I mean, if there was one or two changes you'd like to see, what would they be? To make it more.
Yeah. So I think what has become apparent since we've become an employer provider, so our usual offering, we work with third-party providers to deliver the apprenticeship. We have just in the last 18 to 24 months become an employer provider for a operational the level 3 infrastructure operator apprenticeship. Therefore, we deliver the apprenticeship standard to our apprentices. And what is apparent is that obviously the cost of training good quality trainers, training material and support is costly, and therefore the levy needs to reflect the quality of the training that we're trying to deliver to the apprentices to ensure that they are upskilled and they are ready to and fit to work in the company.
So the standard, you have the standard that you're seeking to deliver, but then you have to develop all the materials that
meet the standard. So because we're the training provider, the operational infrastructure apprenticeship, we are required to meet all the requirements of the standard. So they're Network Rail trainers, then Network Rail facilities, and because of the funding rules, obviously there's a subcontracting element that we need to be mindful of. So training, delivering a good quality apprenticeship is costly. So we just need to ensure that the levy reflects the requirements of the standard.
Yeah, I've got some follow-up questions on that, if that's all right. How far are the standards that you use ones that you share with other industries, and how far are they Network Rail specific?
Yeah, so the level 3 infrastructure operator that we're the employer provider for, we were part of the Trailblazer groups. We work with Transport for London, so we were, I guess, the 2 key players in creating that standard. The other standards are kind of industry-wide standards that we use.
Any more
I'd like
hands
to
up?
bring Michelle in just to give the NHS view.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of the apprenticeship standards are very health specific. So your nurse, your nursing associate, your radiographer. So those are, Jane Hadfield runs the Trailblazer groups for those, and she co-ops in a number of employers that are involved in those. Obviously then the ones like your admin and potentially estates and facilities type, your plumbers, your electricians, they're obviously cross-sector, but we do have an input into those. Can I just come back on the flexibility of the levy? Is that okay? So we hear from employers all the time that, so normally your standard apprenticeship has 6 hours a week off the job training, but obviously your registered nurse, your registered nursing associates, your registered allied health professionals, it's a lot more. It's at least 60% off the job training. And we're hearing we're currently in the process of doing the doctor's apprenticeship. It sounds like that might be 80% off the job training. Obviously, you can't use the levy to backfill those individuals. So employers have to find that money from somewhere to, they are really supportive of the apprenticeships. We are finding that the attrition rate is so much lower than a normal traditional university degree. So they're really supportive of it, but they do ask, if anything, if that apprenticeship levy could be allowed to support them with the backfill monies for those registered degree medical, clinical roles.
That's very interesting. That isn't something I was particularly aware of. That there were concerns about the level of off-the-job training not being sufficient.
That is really high. I mean, 80%. You do sort of feel like, is this? Well, it's just really an apprenticeship if it's 80% off the job. That's very interesting, and obviously those are specific. But can I ask another question? I don't want to dominate this. I mean, I wish other people would come in as well, but it's really please. And it's actually about access to the off-the-job training, which I think is probably more of an issue for. Perhaps not, actually. It would be just for Network Rail as well. I mean, obviously, if you're TfL, it's not really a big issue. I mean, everybody's in London, and so if they are going for training, it's going to be in London, and you're going to have a critical mass of people. But I'd be very interested to know, particularly actually not so much for the nursing roles where they tend to be linked very much with some sort of higher education provider, but for other roles. How do you manage if you've got people scattered across the country? Because this is certainly something I've heard from smaller employers, that it's very hard for them, because if you don't have a critical mass of apprentices, a provider can't afford to do it. And I wondered how you guys managed, given that there's no central planning of off-the-job provision. You have to just either be a provider or find a provider.
So for us at Network Rail, we've actually done a huge piece of work on regionalising our training from an inclusivity point of view, because for our level 3 maintenance apprenticeship, it used to be at a training was delivered at a central site, which requires a lot of time away from home. And then from an inclusivity point of view, actually, we were finding that was excluding people. So we have regionalised a lot of our training, so it's more accessible. We're quite fortunate that we do have quite large volumes in that. So, for example, our cohort for September that will be joining the level 3 scheme is close to 300. So we, being a national, we have training centres across England to allow for that.
So how about NHS? I mean, because again, obviously if it's a big city, fine, but suppose you're dealing with, let's say, Cornwall, because they're always an issue.
Actually, that isn't, the Cornwall is an issue for all training. It can be challenging because there are only limited numbers of providers. Your admin, you tend, so obviously each trust works as its own little business at the moment. I think that will change with the integrated care systems coming online. I hope there's going to be more crossover with your primary care, with your social care and your third sector. So that's how we see it going. The integrated care systems will maybe strategically, if they have the ability to pull the levy so that they can do it as a potentially a group of people. Jane's just joining.
Oh, good, great.
So yeah.
Can I follow up on that though while Jane's collecting her thoughts, because at the moment you don't send any of the levy down, for example, to a GP's practice or to
no, trust do, yeah. So if they Jane will tell you this, but they do work very closely as a system. So it could be like to an ambulance service, because we have a lot of apprenticeships in the ambulance service. We also share it with social care, with primary care. So if a trust isn't going to use their levy pot, they definitely do share that out. But I'll hand you over to Jane now she's here, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Oliver, can we get more pictures on the screen? Is there definitely a gallery view or something, so we can actually see more of the people over there? At least we can see. Jane, welcome. I'm Lord Aberdare. Like Michelle, I'm a stand-in for that she's been rescued by you. I haven't been rescued by anybody yet. And Michelle's been doing a great job of handling some of the questions that we've jumped into. Now, I think you're muted at the moment, but would you like to start by saying what you were going to say? And if we all look bored, you'll know we've already covered that, but I think that's
probably. Probably. So sorry, technical hitch this morning. I do apologise. So I'm Jane Hadfield. I'm National Lead for Apprenticeships with the NHS. And as you said, you cut my lovely colleague Michelle from NHS Employers, who we work closely together with. So I been with the NHS for many years, and I came in as an employer trailblazer chair at the beginning of the reforms, and then came to HE to support employers in implementing their apprenticeship strategies and developing our new apprenticeships. So since 2015, we've had over 100,000 apprenticeship starts in the NHS at all levels. And we're really working on focused local skills needs and making sure that apprenticeships are represented as part of that. And of course, we've been working, now we're part of NHS England as well. We're working with the Department of Health and Social Care and the Department of Education on a long-term sustainable strategy for apprenticeships. So, I mean, I'm happy to take any questions or anything in particular, but I think some of our big success stories are really worth looking at. Our expansion in the registered nurse degree apprenticeship is strong. There's been a manifesto commitment to support employers in particularly focusing on that gap in the workforce. We've now got over 7,000 registered nurse degree apprenticeships, and what we're seeing is that there are people who are over 50% of those are already worked as healthcare support workers or nursing associates, and they're looking at progressing in their careers and becoming registered practitioners. And we're also looking at that model across other professions. So the ambulance trusts are very strong on developing entry-level roles who can then progress into registered professionals such as paramedics. We're seeing an expansion of interest in this sort of progression pathway in allied health professionals. And one of the areas we're focusing on are where there are unusual skills gaps. So for instance, prosthetics and orthotics. It's a fairly new profession, highly specialised, and it's a great progression pathway for people who are working in support roles there. And one of the areas we're now looking at is what does that sustainable strategy look like, and how does it contribute to local skills plans? So it's really, again, working with employers on those local skills demographics. So nursing is a big headliner. There is a workforce gap and there's an age demographic. So we really want to have those solid progression pathways. And also we're looking at how new technical role qualifications like T-levels can sort of enhance those technical pathways as well. So people are making choices when they're choosing to either go on to employment or take A-levels or T-levels. They can do a combination of all those things, or they can now follow a fully technical pathway from school through to T-levels, through to joining the workforce as an apprenticeship, or going on to university in traditional roles, in traditional pathways. So I came in just as you were talking about using the levy, and there's a lot of talk about that we're not spending all our levy, but actually because there's been such a rapid increase in apprenticeship uptake, we're now beginning to see a really good spend. It is patchy across the country, but as Michelle was beginning to say to you, we're working with Department of Education on ways of supporting employers in maximising the opportunity the levy brings us. And what we're also seeing is other industries investing in their NHS. So we're seeing large industries such as the National Food Academy, big retailers, places like Royal Mail, some of the banking organisations who've got levy surplus to their requirements, but they're investing in their local systems to support specific apprenticeships as well. So what I'm really looking at is doing more of that sort of thing, so we can see more transparency and maximising what employers want. So, you know, if we're saying nationally, we're seeing national shortages, say nursing, but actually in a local system, what we really need is pipeline. So we need more healthcare support workers, we need more mental health nurses, occupational health practitioners, that sort of thing. We're able to get employer voice in there and help them kind of galvanise their local skills plans as well. So that's a very quick rattle off of some introductory points. I'm very happy to, you know, take any questions.
Thank you very much. And I've got a couple of questions. We've got Alison Wolf with us here, and I'm sure she will have
Hi.
I can see Sue Gardner is online as well. I'm sure she will have some questions. The things that struck me, Jane, from what you were saying, three things really. First of all, you talked about over 100,000 starts. One of the issues overall with apprenticeships seems to be the lack of completions. So perhaps you can comment on that and whether it is a problem in the NHS or whether. Secondly, I'm delighted to hear about moving towards a long-term sustainable strategy. I'd be interested to know what range that because I think that's one of the things that's rather been lacking. And you mentioned link to local skills plans. And I think the third thing was you gave us rather positive message about because one of the disappointing things has been that the number of apprenticeship starts seems to be declining. But you were sort of indicating that you thought it might be about to so any thoughts on those?
Yeah, absolutely. So completions, it's a really good question. So we do talk about starts, but so if I take the registered nurse degree apprenticeship, we've got really good data now because we've increased the numbers. So it looks, the trend is definitely for a solid completion line. What I'm seeing in the registered nurse degree apprenticeship, as I say, around 7,000 of them, over 95% of them complete. And importantly, they complete and they work for the employer that they've chosen to do their apprenticeship with. Now, apprentices do have breaks in learning. It does take a bit longer. One of the things the apprenticeship enables them to do is to have an official break in learning and take a bit longer if they need to. But we are seeing a strong trend of people completing. And I do think it's because they've got a commitment from that employer to support them. It's very much a triumvirate relationship between the apprentice, the employer and the education provider. So as we're getting more data, we're able to see and track people's behaviour as they go through their programmes. I think the trend is positive. So there is a concern because some of the data, there is a data lag. So we're working with the Department of Education and the Department of Health and our employers on trying to get better contemporaneous data, not just on completion, but also on the demographic to really see if we're making a difference and opening up a widening participation pathway. So I think the trend is positive, but it really does need watching. I mean, I should say at the same time, we do compare within the first year of attrition on traditional undergraduate programs, and there is there can be a very big attrition in the first year of undergraduate nursing programs. So the comparison is very positive in the apprenticeship group, I think largely because of that, the pathway they're following. But it's a really good point, and it does need very careful watching. The expansion piece is hugely ambitious, and that's why I mentioned the pipeline. One of the areas we really need to see, and you will have seen in data, that there has been a drop in entry-level apprenticeships, level 2 and level 3, and I'm really passionate about making sure we have those pathways open so that people who come into employment or career changers, or they're coming into nursing or another profession later in life, they can join as a support worker and have those progression pathways. But we really need to do, I think, more work with our employers and our local systems on those early careers as well, so we can get a solid pathway. We've got some great apprenticeships for assistant and associate roles, and some solid evidence that many of those associates want to progress, but they want to take it perhaps at a slower pace. So that's one of the areas we need to look at, and make sure that the trend for a drop in lower level apprenticeships actually turns, and we make sure we've got that and we track that through. So that's an important one. The bit about the plan, I mentioned the expansion plan, that we have this ambitious long-term workforce plan. I'm a nurse by background. For the first 20 years of my career, the latter 20 years I've been in workforce and OD, is the first time I've seen a really strong commitment to a long-term workforce plan, and I'm really passionate that that's what we need, because you need to forecast where we're going. One of the things that we've seen in the apprenticeship world is apprenticeships can be not just around the roles that we already know we want and need today, but they can be used to help a more agile and changing skill mix. So a number of our apprenticeship standards are for new roles as well. So things like mammography associate, I've mentioned prosthetist and orthotist, peer worker, very, very innovative roles. So I will forecast in the long-term plan that what we set in the first year, 2 years, 3 years is likely to change. But the point is about that long-term forecast and opportunity to negotiate around the funding envelope that supports that. Something I haven't mentioned yet is the success on that nursing expansion was based on a commitment for additional employer funding. So it's great that we've got the levy. So we've got tuition fees covered. So the learner doesn't have to have student debt. They're supported by their employer through the levy. But the expense to the employer is markable because they've got employer costs like salary. So the registered nurse degree expansion, its success is absolutely down to the fact that government H&T invested in backfill money. We call it backfill, it's salary for their off-the-job training. And that's really what we're negotiating through the long-term plan, to try and build on that success. It won't replace undergraduate pathways. What we're really keen on is that this establishes a new talent pipeline. It's not about replacement, it's about opening up new opportunities.
Thank
I answered your questions. I hope I have.
You've done very well, and we are all here waiting with bated breath for the NHS workforce.
Me too.
The most long-term element so far appears to have been production, but why don't I go to Sue Garden next, and then then to Alison. So Sue, it's good to see you. Good morning.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Yes, it's good to be here. Whenever we meet apprentices, we're always bowled over by their enthusiasm,
yes,
how much they're enjoying doing it. But time and again, when you say to them, and did your schools tell you about this? Oh no, the schools told us nothing at all about apprentices. They've all had to find their way, by themselves, really. And I just wondered, what progress are we making with trying to impress on schools that they must stop trying to battle all their youngsters to go the university route, which is obviously not suitable for them. So how can we get the message back into schools? I know a lot of the apprentices we meet make a point of going back to their schools.
Yes, they do.
To say, this is what I'm doing and it's hugely exciting. But how can we get the message back into schools to make sure that all the young people who could benefit from apprentices really get the opportunity to do that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. From my point of view, I think that the Baker Clause will help. I think schools will be required to demonstrate that they are giving a broader view on opportunities. I mentioned T-levels. Now, the T-level in health really only launched last year. I chaired the T-level, the employer group that developed the T-level. So from an employer point of view, we are very receptive to technical pathways. And you mentioned the ambassadorial duties, Sue, that apprentices take on. I've been an apprentice ambassador for many years. A lot of employers are also going into schools, going to careers fairs and doing exactly that. We're trying to support them on a national basis around recognising the importance of ambassadorial duties and giving people to do that, and recognising their extra put. We've got a fantastic national health ambassador program that again kind of gives people an opportunity to register as ambassadors. But I know, because I come from a big trust in Bristol, that we did a lot of informal ambassadorial duties. The other thing that organisations and schools really struggle with is the requirement for work experience and getting valuable work experience and taster days. I realise from a school's point of view it's hugely difficult, and often work experience is focused on trusts, going into trusts which are already, you know, at maximum, but there's a breadth of work experience that would really support that. So again, with the T-level, I'm advocating that we offer a different kinds of work experience for young people so they can get those taster days. And certainly what I've done, and a lot of employers work at systems level, and that's why I mentioned early on the importance of those local skills plans, really work with employers and colleges and schools and HE, so that we can see those whole pathways. The multi-academy trusts do well in that, the university technical colleges do well, but actually we need to give them equal status. They're quite often sponsored by their university partners, but that sort of takes away some of the shine of the fact that they could be doing more themselves. So I think we've got some fantastic resources and facilities in FE colleges, and I feel I'm really passionate about supporting those local colleges in local communities, and really showing to parents and young people the benefits actually that some young people don't want to leave home, they want to work in their local communities, and that's some of the benefits. So I think to answer your question, it's more about harnessing some of the energy that you see with the apprentices, but also from the employers, and recognition. People need recognition for the ambassadorial duties they're undertaking. So there's some of that at national level, but actually it doesn't really get good headlines. It's really good career development as well. So I try and sell it as an opportunity for people and to give back into the system. So more to be done for sure, but I think there's something else around. There is performance management around that Baker Clause, but you know what? I think there's more about social responsibility and those local skills plans that we could focus on to enable some more of this, and really understanding where apprenticeships fit in the system.
And we gather that the Baker Clause is often not fully implemented.
I know, yes.
And the other hard nut to crack is parents, isn't it? How we can convince parents that universities are not the be all and end all. There are these other opportunities which might be much more suitable. So anyway, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Really good point. Thank you.
And I'm going to ask Sonia to comment on your question too, as well. I mean, of course, the other people who need recognition are the schools as for what
sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, just touching on a couple of points that Jane mentioned, you know, likewise in Network Rail, we have over 500 STEM ambassadors that work with schools to get that early engagement. But so just to really kind of follow on from your point, which I think is still a link, is around the stigma with apprenticeships. And I don't know if we're completely shifting that yet. I think there's still a fight to be had there. I think there's still the perception that it's a lesser route. So I do think we still have a little bit of work to do around the stigma, if I'm completely honest. I don't know, Jane, whether you
I think you're absolutely right. And it's some of the headlines are just totally inaccurate. So and I always push back, and I always try and get support from communications teams to help us push back on this. You know, the degree apprenticeships, I think now we need to be focusing on the end result. The journey is important, but actually at the end point, if you're training as a registered nurse, a registered physio, a registered radiographer, and in future a medical doctor, you're qualifying to the same professional standards, and you're often doing the same degree through an apprentice route. I trained in the 80s as a nurse. That was an apprenticeship. I was on the wards, and actually we're all of them are apprentice type routes with the same degree in. But I think I'm not a comms specialist, but we really do need those positive things around turning some of that around, and trying to get some high level ambassadors to say, yeah, I was treated by an apprentice registered nurse, an apprentice physio, and my treatment was fantastic. So those are the things I'm looking at in the future, because that's what I hear out in the system. So we're going to get more of those stories out there, and we need more of our ambassadors to focus on that point. I think parents is a really, really interesting one. It's a bit of a generational thing. This is all still quite new, and the risk that people are taking when they make that choice at 14, 15, 16 is really difficult, isn't it? Around A-levels is the one thing in the education landscape that hasn't really been touched, and it's quite a safe option if you're able to do it. Taking a chance to do a T-level and follow an apprentice route does look more risky, because we don't know, we haven't seen all the end results yet. So that's the kind of, I think, reassurance parents need around enabling to make choices.
Yes, I'd like to make two comments first, actually. The first is that, in fact, if you look at the public opinion polling and focus groups, people are enormously positive.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't actually true that most people are negative about them. I think what is true, of course, which other people have alluded to, is that for many people leaving school, it's very hard to get a level 3 apprenticeship. It's, there is a real shortage, and what we are seeing is a serious decline in level 3, partly because level 6 and 7 are very expensive, and the real problem is that the Treasury treats the levy as necessary to pay for the whole of apprenticeship. So you as employers feel you're expected to spend it all, but actually if you do spend it all, then there's absolutely nothing left for the whole SME sector. So I just want to sort of throw those two things.
A really good point. It is a really good point.
But I also would like to slightly follow up on the sort of the dynamic, because Jane, you said that for nursing, effectively the nursing apprenticeship is structured in such a way that if you don't get a subsidy for the wage, you basically over and above the levy, you can't do it. Now that's not how it operates, obviously, in Network Rail, and it's not how apprenticeship has traditionally operated. The whole idea has been that you are on the job, you get a relatively low wage while you're learning, but that over time it pays for itself. And I'm struck by the very different dynamic for Network Rail, which is much more traditional route, compared to the NHS. So can I sort of start with Network Rail and yes, ask Sonia, it seems to me like yours is much more traditional. How much less do you pay your apprentices than they will get when they're fully qualified? And then I'd like to come back to Jane, because if we have to pay a vast amount for apprentice nurses, then honestly and truthfully, it's not clear to me that financially this can ever be more than a small amount of it, because it's costing much more than it is to train them in universities.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just this year, actually, for our intake come September, we have significantly increased the apprentice salary to support the apprentice training whilst living everyday life. Within the first year, the apprentice is on a little over 18,000. And then in years 2 and 3, they go up to, I think, 22,000. But that's changed this year, taking in feedback from the apprentices, increased cost in living. Up until this year, it was, I think, 12,000. So.
And financially, that's okay. You can do that.
So we had a residential site, which I think lessened that burden. So for the level 3 maintenance apprenticeship, they had residential at a site in Coventry. So I think that was almost a bit of our trade-off with the low salary that they had a residential. We've closed that site because of the inclusivity point, which is why we've now increased the salary to reflect that.
But generally, I mean, from your point of view, the business case is okay. I mean, you know, because obviously the levy isn't so great that it begins, you know, it's there's the point at which you say, well, okay, we just won't use the levy because the apprenticeships don't.
No, we absolutely support, and we can work with the levy. We would, of course, the levy, as I mentioned, the levy needs to reflect the quality of the training that we provide, but the 20% to 80% works for us as Network Rail for the time being. You know, we can use the levy to support it's required for.
And financially, the apprenticeship model makes a lot of sense.
It does, absolutely, yeah.
Whereas it sounds to me bluntly as though for the NHS, it's not obvious that it does make financial sense.
Well, what we're trying to do with the modelling is undergraduate, let's use nurses as an example, but all clinical professions are supported through NHS England's when we have a tariff, like a placement tariff, so employers get some support to support the placements. It's not as high as a salary, but we've been campaigning to make sure apprentices are also eligible for that. So that's the aspiration in the long-term plan, that whoever is in the learning environment, whether you're an undergraduate, a postgraduate or an apprentice, the employer still gets that placement tariff. So that's the first thing. I think the thing that gets lost here is the longer term return on investment here. Now, I've worked with some employers out in systems who've worked out, because they're offsetting apprenticeship pay against other things like temporary staffing, that they'll get a return on investment within a finite period, partly because that apprentice transitions really quickly into the profession. So they're already employed and they transition from being the apprentice nurse, occupational therapist, operating department practitioner, straight into that practitioner role.
So why do you need the extra backfill?
Yeah, because in the upfront cost, it's the upfront cost really, because like in nursing, it's a higher proportion of off-the-job training than in a traditional apprenticeship. It's about 50% supernumerary time off the job. So in the modelling I've done with some employers, they've worked out that they do get that return in investment within 2 years, because the apprentice comes into the workforce, transitions more smoothly and stays. So there is that. If we want to get the numbers though, putting the pump priming in really helps at the beginning to get the cost. And that's one of the things around having a long-term workforce plan. You don't see that return on investment in short-term workforce plans, do you? So one of the things about us now having a much longer term forecast, we can begin modelling what that return on investment looks like against retention rates, against other kinds of transitional workforce like bank and agency use. So if we can close the vacancy gap, we can reduce bank and agency use, we retain a longer time in the workforce. So that's the kind of modelling we need to do in the future for that. In terms of apprentice pay, most apprentices, we've got over 200 NHS trusts, for instance, and they're largely on agenda for change, but they will each have their own negotiated policy for their apprentices agreed with their staff side. But the majority of them, the apprentices, will be on healthcare support worker salaries, which start at 22,000. And also, if they're topping up their degree, I didn't mention this, some of them are working as associate practitioners, so nursing associates or assistant practitioners. They might be on band 4, so they're being paid on their band 4. They're still working as they in that associate role for 50% of the time, so they're contributing to service, something that's actually really important but quite difficult to cost, but they can complete their degree quicker. So they can top up their degree and do a shorter apprenticeship. So they're only apprenticed for 2 years. So those are the kinds of things we're modelling, a really innovative modelling using this apprenticeship pathway, and it's all connected in with that return on investment. But the thing that we must go back to, it isn't all about the cost, it's about the diversification.
No, I understand that, but ultimately it's about the cost.
I
Because
mean,
if the money isn't there, then the trust won't do
no,
it.
it's the cost, yeah, the cost is, yeah, it feels prohibitive. But I can think of a particular trust, you know, who were early implementers of the nursing associate and the registered nurse. They've got huge, like all trusts, like all public health, public services, they've got cost improvement plans, that sort of thing. But it's one of the things they value enough. So their board has approved their apprenticeship programme going forward, just in advance of the long-term plan and any funding we might agree. So,
Can I ask one more question? I'm actually really interested in this, having also watched basically very little movement on the nurse associate side, bluntly, in the last few years. And it really goes back again to something that Sonia was saying, when you were actually able at Network Rail to look at your things nationally and go, well, we won't have a residential anymore, we'll go to regionalisation, which I think is very interesting. And I mean, obviously what this is showing is how every industry tends to be different, because one of the problems, it seems to me, with the 200 trusts is that well, actually, you know, you mentioned FE colleges. Well, very few FE colleges currently are able to offer nurse associate programs. And that's partly because of pump priming there, and it's partly because the budget there's no obvious budget. And so it's really a question, I suppose, about where, you know, you've got this vast NHS sector with huge skill and staffing difficulties. And really about what would it take to have a more coherent training provision approach, because I thought it was really great to hear that you sort of thought about regionalisation, and that therefore it wasn't just a question of, well, if I don't live in the right place, I can't do a Network Rail apprenticeship. And I think for the NHS this is a real challenge, and maybe actually ask Michelle her view as an employer here too, if she's still on. You know, if you've got 200 different sets of apprentice pay negotiations and 200 separate employers, it feels like it's going to be hard to move to a situation where, instead of just having a few great universities that do associate programs and look at pathways, you've actually got, let's start with associate programs to begin with, you know, really available nationally. And maybe, Michelle, I should come back to you on this, because you have the employer's perspective.
Yeah, so I suppose it is, I think I sort of touched on it before, it's the integrated care systems, I think, are starting to work in this area. I'm just thinking of Leeds, Jane, they already work health, and they have a health and social care academy that crosses the whole of that region. And so they are trying to sort of pull their resources together to help that infrastructure. And what we're trying to do with Jane is trying to share that really good practice across the country. Yes, it won't work everywhere, because, you know, Leeds is quite an urban area, and like you were saying before about Cornwall, but we, you know, Devon have got an amazing integrated care system as well. So they are starting to, there's barriers. I'm not going to say it's perfect, you know, working together with, you know, organisations that they've never had to in the past. It's been very separate. You've had your NHS over here, your social care here, your primary care there, and actually, but it is I can see a difference as that representative of those employers, that people are willing and want to make it work for their patients. And it's yes, it's the start of the journey, but I'm hoping we will see a difference. Like Jane says, it's going to take a while, but it's definitely positive.
Thanks very much. I think somebody else probably ought to ask.
We're getting very close to the end of our time. Jane, you can comment very briefly on that question, and indeed make any final comments that you would like to make. Meanwhile, anybody else in the audience who've been very hopefully attentive but quiet so far, it has something they'd like to ask. Now is your last chance to That includes those in the room here. And then after Jane, I'll just give Sonia a chance to say anything that she would like to add. Jane.
Yeah, I just follow up on the ICBP. So I'm in the southwest. What's going on in Bristol is different what's going on in Cornwall, but those ICBs are really bringing those communities together. In the far east, in Lincolnshire, I'm seeing communities working together across health and social care, and they're doing things like pooling their apprenticeship numbers, comparing their levy policies, looking at their salary structures so that they're not competing across the same potential workforce pool. And one of the strong things, for instance, in Hampshire, Isle of Wight, huge rurality as well as city centres, that sort of thing. We're seeing employer providers recruiting that level 2 and level 3 pathway, working with colleges for T levels and associate roles, and then working in partnership within those multi-academy trusts in particular for their degree partnerships. And we're also seeing national degree providers like BPP and OU across the country. And again, in Bridgewater and College, Taunton College, they've got degree awarding power. So where there's no university able to deliver that level 5 and level 6 registered nursing apprenticeships, they're beginning to develop their own in Somerset. So there's masses of innovation that, as Michelle was saying, we're trying to get that modelling and share across those communities the solutions rather than talking about the issues.
Thank you very much. No comments no questions in the room, no questions on the screen. So we will go to Sonia for any final thoughts. Sonia, would you like that?
Yeah, just really that we're absolutely see apprenticeships as one of the key ways that we will meet the skill shortage of the industry, and we will continue to maximise the use of the levy, diversify our offering, and make it as inclusive to all from levels 2 to 7 really. We're absolute supporters of it, and which is why we have built up our team so greatly in order to support the business in this way.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much. Well, it's been a fascinating session. One thing we haven't covered for obvious reasons, but which Alison made reference to is, and is close to my heart, is the challenges of persuading and enabling SMEs to offer more apprenticeships, but neither of you really fall into that category, so I can understand why we haven't addressed that. I must say the challenges of trying to make sense of on the one hand, recognizing the needs of the 200 different NHS trusts that you're working with, but on the other hand, trying to make sure that they fit within some sort of sensible pattern was very, very intriguing, and it makes the famous workforce plan look even more interesting if and when it eventually appears. So I look forward to that. But in closing the session, first of all, many thanks to our speakers, Sonia, who has found herself on the spot rather earlier than we were perhaps expecting, Jane, who made a fantastic contribution when she did appear, and
sorry I was late.
And of course Michelle, who did a great job of filling the breach earlier. So thanks to all three of you, and of course particularly to my two colleagues, Alison Wolf and Sue Garden, for their contributions. I think there was a target, wasn't there, for the public sector?
Yes, and was right. You guys were just for the government departments. There was a target.
Was it just government departments?
Yes. Yes.
But I mean, one does wonder. You know, it's very good to be thinking about an NHS workforce plan, but what there isn't, and I think one of you did. Well, it was probably Jane who did talk about this. Is some sort of overall plan. I mean, this all seems to be. We need a national skills plan.
Let's have coffee and debate that. I'm slightly torn about it.
Okay. Now we've got something to keep talking about. But it's been a very interesting session. Thank you very much to all who've been here. I also arrived late, so I apologize for that. Thanks to the All-Party Group for organising the session.
Thank you very much. And I'm late for something else.